Victoria stood by the open window, the late afternoon light softening the tension in her jaw. The breeze played with the edge of the silk scarf tied loosely around her neck, the same one Aaron had given her on their last anniversary. She didn't look at him as she spoke, she couldn't. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, like this had played in her head 100 times before. "I need space, Aaron." Aaron blinked, his back straightening as if bracing for impact. "Space?" "Yes." She turned now, facing him squarely with that unmistakable confidence that had drawn him to her in the first place. "I feel like I'm fading into someone I never meant to become. I need to rediscover who I am, without you." The words hit harder than he expected. Not because they were loud or cruel, but because they were detached. Clinical. Like she was removing a splinter rather than walking away from 5 years of love and shared dreams. "I've been suffocating," she continued. Us, it's all so safe. Predictable. I need more. I need to feel powerful. Powerful. That word echoed in the room like a slap. Aaron stood still, trying to process the unraveling. There were no tears in her eyes, no tremble in her voice. Just the steely certainty of someone who had already made up her mind. And in that certainty, he saw something chilling. She didn't think he would leave a mark on her. She thought she could walk away, explore, and come back if she wanted, like he'd still be there, waiting. "You think this is about control?" he asked finally. "It's about me," she said. "I've given so much of myself to everyone, especially you. I want to feel like I own my choices again." He didn't beg. That surprised even him. The Aaron of a few years ago might have tried to talk her out of it, promising changes, asking questions, searching for fault lines in her logic. But now? He just nodded slowly, chest tightening. "Then go," he said. That stunned her. For just a second, her eyes flickered. She had expected resistance. Tears. Maybe even anger. But Aaron offered none of those things. Only a mirror. Calm. Controlled. Unshaken. Victoria picked up her bag, the one with the monogrammed initials he had gifted her last Christmas, and walked toward the door. Her heels echoed like thunder on the hardwood floor. She paused with her hand on the knob. "I just need to figure out who I am." Aaron's voice was low, quiet, but resolute. "Make sure you like the woman you find." She didn't respond. The door clicked shut behind her, and with that sound, something inside Aaron shifted. Not broke, shifted. She had walked away to chase power, never realizing she'd just handed him the chance to finally find his own. The days after Victoria's departure blurred into one another at first, like foggy windowpanes streaked with silence and questions he didn't know how to ask. For a while, Aaron moved on autopilot, coffee brewed mechanically each morning, work handled with precision but no real presence, and evenings spent staring at muted television screens that flickered against walls far too quiet. But beneath the numbness, something subtle had started to shift. There was no dramatic collapse. Just an unsettling stillness, then the slow, deliberate push toward clarity. He hadn't realized how much of himself had been diluted, how much of his daily rhythm had been built around accommodating someone else's emotional tides. Without Victoria's presence, the house became still, yes, but it also became his. He began rearranging things. First the furniture, then the patterns of his days. The bedroom was stripped bare of her aesthetic touches. The soft gray sheets she loved were replaced by a bold navy set Aaron had admired once but never bought because she didn't like the color. He repainted the kitchen walls in a deep hunter green, something rich and grounded. It was a subtle rebellion, yes, but it felt like reclaiming space, his space. At first, he struggled with the quiet. Her absence echoed, especially at night. But the emptiness eventually gave way to focus. Aaron took walks in the early mornings before work, letting the brisk air fill his lungs. He began jogging. Just a mile at first, then 2, then 5. It wasn't about fitness, it was about rhythm, effort, momentum. Moving forward. He dug into books he hadn't touched in years, non-fiction, philosophy, even poetry. Rainer Maria Rilke became a quiet companion in the evenings, offering him a strange kind of comfort through verses about solitude and becoming. Aaron didn't post about his journey. He didn't drown his thoughts in social media posts or group texts. He just lived. Fully, and for the first time in years, entirely on his terms. Work, too, took on a new meaning. He stopped declining opportunities to lead. He began mentoring junior colleagues, not just as a manager, but as a man who had something to offer beyond spreadsheets and projections. His reputation grew, not louder, but deeper. People started turning to him not just for solutions, but for wisdom. He had never sought external validation, not really. But as time passed, Aaron began to see himself more clearly. He wasn't the man Victoria had chosen to walk away from, at least not anymore. That man had been steady and kind, yes, but also passive, quiet, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Now, there was a calm assertiveness in him, the kind forged not in reaction to pain but in the quiet labor of rebuilding. One evening, he signed up for a woodworking class at the local community center, a random decision, prompted by a flyer at a coffee shop. There, he met other men, some retired, others freshly divorced or just trying to carve something meaningful from wood and life. Aaron found something meditative in the process, the focus required to sand down edges, the patience it took to align every joint. Each creation, even the flawed ones, felt like proof that his hands, and heart, were capable of making something strong. Occasionally, people asked about Victoria. Friends. Colleagues. A well-meaning neighbor who still didn't know what had happened. Aaron never badmouthed her. He simply said, she needed to find herself. I'm finding myself too. It was the truth, and it didn't hurt to say anymore. He started noticing beauty in the small things again. The way sunlight streamed through the windows in the late afternoon. The smell of rain on concrete. The warmth of a stranger's smile at the grocery store. His life wasn't flashy or filled with noise, but it was rich in ways that couldn't be faked. And somewhere in the middle of all this quiet evolution, something remarkable happened. He stopped missing her. Not because he hated her. Not because he had replaced her. But because the man he was becoming didn't need her anymore. He no longer waited for closure. He didn't rehearse what he'd say if she came back. He simply lived, deeply rooted in the present, knowing that every step forward was one she'd never anticipated he'd take without her. Victoria had left to feel powerful. But Aaron, he had stayed and learned what power really meant. At first, freedom felt intoxicating. Victoria woke up in a sunlit apartment, the one she had chosen without compromise. She drank coffee from her favorite oversized mug and didn't have to share the remote or explain why she was out late or answer to anyone. For weeks, that feeling sustained her, a high masked as empowerment. She filled her days with brunches, yoga classes, spontaneous weekends with friends, and long-winded social media posts about reinventing her identity. She convinced herself she had made the brave choice, the hard one, the one people only talked about but rarely acted on. But as the weeks stretched into months, the initial euphoria faded into something more ambiguous. The apartment that once felt liberating now echoed in a strange, hollow way at night. Her laughter at dinner parties began to feel forced, performative, like she was trying too hard to prove that leaving was worth it. The vibrant new clothes in her closet didn't bring the validation she expected. No one applauded her for walking away from love. They liked her posts, yes. They clapped at the brunch table. But no one filled the silence that crept in at 2 a.m. She thought she would feel powerful. Instead, she felt unmoored. It wasn't just loneliness, it was the realization that her freedom came with a price she hadn't counted on, disconnection. Her friends, though supportive, had their own lives. Their encouragement had come from a place of solidarity, not necessarily wisdom. Some of them were still stuck in cycles of validation-seeking relationships themselves. Others, the bolder ones, began to pull away, sensing that Victoria wasn't as liberated as she claimed to be. She had left to find herself, but she'd never defined what that meant. Instead of self-discovery, she'd found distraction. And now that the noise had died down, she saw the truth. The power she craved had always been in her hands, it just didn't look the way she imagined. It wasn't in control, or dominance, or absence. It was in understanding, in partnership, in being seen by someone who had loved her without conditions. And that someone was gone. Aaron's silence was deafening. At first, she told herself he needed time. That he'd reach out. That he was playing a game. But no text came. No missed calls. No cryptic, "hope you're okay" messages. The man who used to check in when she had a bad day, who'd bring her chamomile tea before bed, who noticed when she switched shampoos, had simply disappeared. Curiosity turned to frustration. Frustration to anxiety. She tried a soft approach, liking one of his posts, reacting to a story. Nothing. She messaged him once, something casual, "Hey, how have you been?" No reply. She sent another days later, "I know things ended awkwardly. I just wanted to check in." Still silence. She wasn't used to being ignored. In the past, Aaron had always made space for her. He forgave easily, sometimes too easily. She had banked on that. She had assumed he'd wait, that he would always be within reach, like a familiar coat in the closet you grab when the weather turns cold. But he wasn't waiting anymore. He had moved forward without her. When she finally worked up the courage to drive by the old house, her heart clenched at the sight of the yard trimmed, the lights glowing warmly in the windows. But what gutted her was the car in the driveway that wasn't his, small, white, with a dream catcher hanging from the rearview mirror. She had never seen it before. Worse, she couldn't imagine who it belonged to. Suddenly, she wasn't just regretting her decision, she was grieving a version of him she could no longer reach. One night, after finishing a glass of wine alone on the balcony, she opened her old photo album, the physical one, tucked away and never digitized. It held years of memories, trips to the mountains, sleepy mornings in flannel, silly selfies from road trips. She lingered on one particular photo, Aaron, brushing flour from her nose as they baked together. He had flour on his cheeks, his sleeves rolled up, and that look in his eyes, the one that said "You're all I need." She hadn't realized what that look meant at the time. Or maybe she had, and just hadn't known how rare it was. The next day, she tried again. This time, she called. It rang once before going to voicemail. She tried again. No answer. She left a message, her voice trembling despite rehearsing it a dozen times. "Aaron, I don't even know what to say except that I miss you. I made a mistake. I thought I needed space, but what I really needed was perspective. I see things so clearly now. I see you. I was wrong to walk away, and I don't expect anything. I hope we can talk." She sat for hours waiting for a response. It never came. And in that silence, the weight of her decision finally settled in. She hadn't found power. She had abandoned love. The life she imagined, the one without compromise, had turned out to be empty. Because she didn't just lose a man. She lost the man. The one who had been willing to build a life with her, flaws and all. Victoria stood in front of the door she once called home, a shaky breath held tight in her chest. She hadn't been here in months, yet the scent of the pine tree in the yard and the familiar creak of the porch under her heels felt exactly the same. What didn't feel the same was her. The woman who had walked out that door, certain she was chasing something greater, had been replaced by someone quieter, more self-aware, and undeniably more broken. She hadn't expected to feel nervous. She had told herself on the drive over that this was just a conversation, a reconnection. But the moment she saw the brass handle, polished and clean as ever, she realized she wasn't returning to claim something. She was hoping for something she no longer had a right to. When Aaron opened the door, he looked surprised, but not shaken. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink too long. He didn't soften. "Victoria," he said plainly. No anger. No warmth. Just a name, spoken like a statement of fact. Her heart sank a little in her chest. "Hi," she offered, trying for a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Do you have a moment?" Aaron stepped aside, silently, allowing her in. The air inside felt unfamiliar. It was still his home, but it no longer felt like a place she belonged. There was a new energy in the space, something steady and uncluttered, like the man now sitting across from her on the edge of the couch, waiting. "I wasn't sure if you'd answer the door," she admitted, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I wasn't sure I would either," he replied. She let the silence hang, hoping he would fill it. When he didn't, she pressed on. "I've had a lot of time to think. About us. About what I did." Aaron nodded slightly but said nothing. His eyes didn't burn with resentment. That would have been easier. No, instead they were calm. And that calm unnerved her more than fury ever could. "I thought I needed to leave to find myself," she continued, her voice quiet but sincere. "But I think I just needed to feel like I was in control of something. I realize now, what I left behind wasn't the problem. I was." Aaron finally spoke, but his tone remained measured. "I know." Those two words, so simple, landed like a gavel in a courtroom. She wanted to argue, to explain, to beg, but she didn't. She knew he wasn't trying to be cruel. He was being honest. Honest in a way she hadn't been to either of them when she walked away. "I miss what we had," she said. "I miss you. I miss how safe I felt with you. How certain everything felt." Aaron leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "You didn't miss me, Victoria. You missed the version of me who would have taken you back before you said those things and walked away like I was a chapter you were done reading." She blinked, swallowing the lump in her throat. He was right, and it stung more because he said it without malice. Just truth. "I thought you'd wait," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I know," he said again. That was part of the problem. There was a finality to his voice, not dramatic or cruel, but certain. She felt like someone walking into a room long after the lights had been turned off, hoping there was still warmth left in the air. But the room had cooled. "I've changed, Victoria," he said. "Not out of revenge. Not to prove anything. I had to rebuild. And what I've built doesn't have space for someone who sees love as something they can take off and put back on when it's convenient." She wanted to defend herself, but she knew he wouldn't buy it. She wouldn't either. So she stayed quiet, letting the weight of his words fall where they may. "I'm not angry," he added after a moment. "I was. For a long time. But now I'm just done. Not out of spite. Out of peace. You left to feel powerful. But what you didn't realize is, you gave me the chance to find mine." Victoria lowered her eyes. She wasn't here to grovel, but her body had already folded inward. She no longer felt like the confident woman who once walked away, certain she could return whenever she pleased. She felt like a trespasser in a world that had healed without her. "I just hoped," she started, but he gently cut her off. "I know what you hoped. And I hope you find what you're looking for. Truly. But I'm not him anymore. And I'm not yours." There it was. The closure she hadn't been ready for. The moment that told her, beyond any doubt, that the door she once slammed shut couldn't be opened again, not because it was locked, but because it led somewhere else now. Aaron stood and walked to the door, holding it open. Not out of malice. Not to rush her. But as a gentle nudge that the visit, like the relationship, was over. Victoria rose slowly, her eyes misted but her face composed. She walked past him with a soft nod and stepped out into the cool afternoon air. As the door closed quietly behind her, she stood still for a long moment on the porch, feeling the weight of everything she had learned too late. Victoria didn't cry in the car. She didn't scream or pound the steering wheel like she imagined she might. Instead, she just sat there, both hands resting on her thighs, staring blankly through the windshield as the reality settled in. The man she had left behind, the man she believed would still love her through the mess, was gone. Not in the literal sense, but in every way that mattered. He had moved forward without her, not out of spite, but from self-respect. She had always thought she understood strength. To her, it had meant walking away, asserting her needs, carving out space. But now, sitting alone in the driveway of a man who no longer belonged to her, she saw what real strength looked like. It was measured, quiet, unwavering. It didn't need to be loud. It didn't seek validation. It simply was. Aaron's silence wasn't cold, it was complete. He had nothing more to say because he had said everything he needed to by choosing himself. That choice echoed louder than any argument ever could have. The drive home was slow, not because of traffic but because she needed time to think. Each streetlight seemed to mark another realization. She had spent so much energy chasing a version of empowerment built on distance and independence that she failed to recognize the strength in partnership, the courage it took to stay and work through discomfort instead of running from it. Back in her apartment, the walls felt closer than usual. The minimalist decor, once a symbol of her fresh start, now seemed sterile. Lifeless. She sat at the edge of her bed and looked around at all the curated choices she had made in her pursuit of reinvention. None of them brought her comfort. She opened her phone and scrolled through old photos, not for nostalgia but to see him again, the old Aaron. The one she remembered. But even the images felt distant. He wasn't just older now, he was different. He had grown into someone she no longer knew, someone she no longer had access to. It was a strange kind of grief, mourning someone still alive but forever changed. Aaron, meanwhile, didn't think much about the visit after it ended. He had already grieved. Already processed. What Victoria didn't know was that she hadn't shattered him when she left. She had set him free. And in that freedom, he had rebuilt himself with care. Brick by brick. Morning by morning. Page by page. He had constructed a life where peace wasn't something borrowed from someone else's presence, but something earned through his own consistency and clarity. He no longer needed anyone to tell him his worth. He didn't check for her messages. He didn't hope for apologies. He didn't fantasize about what could have been. He lived each day with intent, doing the things he loved, surrounded by people who reflected the same values he had cultivated during his solitude. There were women who entered his life, yes. Some stayed a while, some didn't. But he no longer sought completion in someone else. He was already whole. Victoria would occasionally think of him when she passed a man wearing his cologne, or when she saw a couple laughing in a way that wasn't loud but easy, earned. And every time, a small ache would remind her that what she once had wasn't lost by fate. It was discarded by choice. She had left to feel powerful. And in doing so, she had taught him how powerful it was to be left, and still rise.